Aloha and welcome to day 2 of Punahou School's inaugural Festival of Ideas, part of this year's virtual Alumni Week. Whether you're an alum, a current student, Punahou employee, or a member of the public, we're delighted to have you with us today. The festival's overall theme this inaugural year is innovation, and today we focus on innovation in education. It would be hard to find 3 more qualified and dynamic people to discuss this topic than the panel you're about to hear. And it's my honor to introduce these 3 innovators. Jean Case is chair of the National Geographic Society and CEO of the Case Impact Network and Case Foundation, an organization that has invested in hundreds of initiatives and partnerships to strengthen the social sector. Jean is also the author of a wonderful and inspiring book, Be Fearless: 5 Principles for a Life of Breakthroughs and Purpose. Dr. Paris Fiore Kim has served as Punahou's junior school principal over the past 6 years. And Paris has led powerful innovations in literacy and math education and social and emotional learning, and served across the entire school in the course of her 23-year career. Dr. Emily McCarron is Punahou's Academy Principal. Through her leadership in this role over the past 6 years, Emily has helped advance crucial thinking at Punahou around the key abilities and skills that all our graduates will require as they pursue careers and lives in a world that is rapidly changing. I'm really looking forward to this exciting session, and now I'm happy to turn things over to Emily to get us started. Thank you so much.
Mahalo, Mike, and aloha to everybody. It is so exciting to be here today with 2 of my very favorite people on the planet, Paris and Jean, to talk about educational innovation. We'd love to first orient us all just to our shared space. If you're joining, make sure you know that there is a Q&A session area of the screen, and you can definitely, starting right off the bat, send us questions. Go ahead, we'd be excited. We'll be answering those and addressing those as we go along. And also there's a chat feature, and that's a spot where you can put in any insights or observations that you have as the conversation is unfolding, and we'll be sure to keep an eye on that as well. So to get started, I think we are just so excited to talk about sort of the intersection of being brave and fearless at the end of what's been the longest school year ever. So Jean, we'd love to sort of just hear from you to start about, what are the things in your spheres of influence that the pandemic has accelerated? What are the things that it sort of slowed down? How have your incredible and sort of evergreen principles of fearlessness been applied in this sort of interesting time?
Yeah, well, thank you, Emily. Can I just say how wonderful it is to share the stage with you in Paris? I've had the privilege of knowing you both for quite some time and learning from you, and it's really fun to be with you today. And a special shout out to our community there in Hawaii, our Punahou family and friends and colleagues all over. So, I think for a lot of us, it's been a year of innovation, mostly because we had to. We didn't really have a choice, right? And for us at National Geographic, we had a 3-year sort of strategic plan around education that we accelerated and made sort of a reality in like 3 to 6 months. There were tens of millions of people joining us, teachers, parents, and students from all over the world. So we were able to try some things and innovate in a way that might have taken quite a while. And the greatest thing, and I'm hearing this from so many organizations, schools and otherwise, is that a lot of things that we learned in the last year will endure when we're all sort of as close back to normal as we're going to get. So although it's been a year of a lot of suffering and sadness, across the board, whether it be companies or organizations, I've just seen people, find all kinds of new ways to innovate.
So I'm going to jump in here and thinking about, what you just said, that this has propelled us forward at such an unprecedented rate that all we could do was look forward and to respond and create as quickly as possible. And we've all spoken about how this is a real opportunity to reset, not to go back to normal, but to sort of launch forward from here. And I wonder what your thoughts are about bringing all the constituents along in that. So we knew what we were doing and what principles were guiding us. And now we see this great horizon of moving forward. And there are many constituents that are hoping for us to return that. Let's talk about, if you will, please, Jean, what does it take for us to make the paradigmatic shift for everyone that we serve? What assumptions need to be dispelled, what education needs to happen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, there's this concept of deep listening, and I would say that's something else we've observed in the last year. And this, really runs the gamut from leaders on all fronts as well as corporate CEOs. And the idea there is, they suddenly were a little more face-to-face with their teams than they might have been if they were in their corner office or in their normal course and speed. And as people had challenges and some of sort of the, let's just say, the ways maybe society doesn't serve everyone equally was laid a little bit more bare, I think we saw leaders on all fronts challenging themselves to say, what do we need to do? We certainly did this at National Geographic, where we realized particularly the parents with young children were overly burdened during this time of our employees. And so we did something as simple, Paris, as, we set up, and it was because we did deep listening first to say, what do you need? How can we be helpful? They said, well, we could sure share responsibilities a lot easier in the house if you had structured Zoom hours, but more importantly, structured hours when we knew we didn't have to be on Zoom. And then that way, as two parents, we can kind of coordinate who's got who when. And so we were seeing, this kind of stuff play out across. And I know there are a couple of, corporates that basically provided childcare consultants for their employees, because when daycare dried up, schools closed, nannies didn't show up, that became such a crisis. So I think for the leaders that were listening and observing carefully and hoping, hopefully getting to understanding, then they could come up with some solutions and ways to address those challenges.
That's such a good point, Jean. And I think about just the work that, Paris and her team did in the junior school in that space. Last March when we transitioned to at-home learning, it was sort of like, okay, let's have a school day. Let's approximate a school day, but on WebEx for 5 and 6 year olds, which of course meant they're big people in their homes, sort of like forcing them to be in front of the screen. And so Paris, your team did such an amazing job adapting over the course of the year to meet that need of, what is the different learning environment that kids are in? What role should and can families play in that when they're at home? Do you want to share some of those stories, Paris?
Well, as I think about, thanks for mentioning that, Em. As I think about that, I also think about how agile the team of teachers, my faculty was, because we definitely were iterating. This was stuff that hadn't been done before. Small children rely on sort of a social context to learn, and to create that social context online was a brand new vista. And there was a lot of iteration and adjustment. So I think there was not only a little bit of, there was certainly bravery involved, but also agility and definitely, crashing and learning, literally. I
love that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's, to quote you, we were crashing and learning quickly. And I think of this other principle that you name in your book, Jean, about embracing risk as R&D. It was definitely R&D for several months. And that the ability that our faculty had across the school, this is not just this is a K-12 feature of the last year, and our faculty's ability to learn quickly and adjust quickly and design quickly. And that's the thing that we want to hold on to, right? Is now recognizing that it took some courage, and guess what? We have the capacity for it. So.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about risk as R&D, because of course I did write about that in the book. And the thing about R&D, and whether they be tech environments or medicine or science or whatever, is that's usually a lab where you are fully expecting that some things aren't going to work out. Always hesitant to use the word failure around a school, but you know what I mean, that some of the experiments aren't going to pan out. And I think what we did see in the last year is really a willingness to try new things, and almost like an air cover that if some of them don't work out, it's okay. And often, in innovation, that's the difference between stopping teams or empowering teams, is what is the unspoken, kind of ethos? Is it, sure, you can try new things, but if you fail, you're going to pay for it. And I think last year, the other principle is let urgency conquer fear. And so I think people who saw an urgent need to do something differently and embrace this idea that we're going to try stuff. It's like R&D. And if we fail, it's not the end of the world. We're going to have to keep trying and, make failure matter is the principle in the book. And the idea there is, look, make failure matter says failure is a powerful teacher. You can learn from it if you're smart enough to apply and perfect your idea going forward and not be stopped by it.
So what's the secret sauce when urgency goes away?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So sort of another ethos is, it was Albert Einstein who said failure is success in progress. And Thomas Edison who said, I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 things that won't work. And so if we could really bring not only young people, but all of us along to say, failure can be paralyzing. It can keep you both from trying things or moving forward. But if we could really embrace this idea that it's really an important part of driving innovation, of just literally making yourself better or what you're setting out to do better, I think it could change things. And, urgency is powerful. I mean, that sort of stomach churning stuff turns out to be a beautiful recipe for getting you out of your comfort zone and really encouraging you to try some things that in normal course and speed you would not.
Yeah, you've been so inspirational to us, Jean, in just thinking about, because, as you alluded to, schools are places that tend to really shy away from the notion of failure because we assume that when we're failing at something, we're hurting kids. And so Paris's recasting of that as learning has been so important, and you've helped us see how we have to figure out how to do that in learning spaces too. Like that school itself for kids has to be a place where they're trying stuff out, where they're tinkering, where we're telling them there's going to be a bunch of times that you don't succeed at this, and then you're going to get the big idea. And we've been so grateful to try and work around the edges of our curriculum and find spaces to do that. I think one of our big aspirations in this sort of next season of learning in education in general is, how do we make that core to everything kids do? How do we make sure that when kids are experiencing whatever the learning outcome that we're trying to, nudge them towards is, that they can believe that, like, I might not get this at first, but I'm gonna get it at some point, and every time I don't get it is helping me arrive there. That sort of entrepreneurial spirit is such an important.
Boy, you really said it, Emily. We've been so impressed with Punahou's sort of embrace of that and bringing the entrepreneurial spirit to the kids, and even just a wonder and a sense of inquiry, right? At National Geographic, we like to say there is a close relationship between education and exploration. Well, for so many of our explorers out across the world, they don't necessarily have a hypothesis they're chasing. It's pure inquiry. And I've loved what I've seen at Punahou in recent years. It's really opening up that kind of environment to the kids.
Super fun.
Sorry.
Go first.
Please go ahead, Em.
Oh, I was just going to say the question of letting urgency conquer fear. I think your book, Jean, was kind of like a Bible to us in the early months of the pandemic. I remember vividly, we were flying back from the National Conference of Independent Schools that happens every year in late February of 2020. And we had just had, a series of conversations about, this thing might be coming and we might need to make some adjustments to how we operate school. And I remember getting on the plane. It was the last time I got on a plane and I didn't have a mask on or anything, but the person sitting next to me had like a full-on spacesuit and like rubber gloves up to their elbows. And I thought, I think the world might be changing a little bit. And I had my iPad and I sort of flipped to your book in my Kindle app, and I just was reading over and over again, like, people will take risks, makes failure matter, reach beyond your bubble, let urgency conquer fear. And it was really, when I look back on when we arrived home, we sort of gathered our teams across the school and we said, okay, what might we know about the next little time at the school? what do we need? And we had really like skeletal plans of what we might do if we had to learn from home. And the only sort of framing philosophy or the thing that sort of guided us was like, we're going to try and we're going to do our best and we're going to take care of each other. And it was really grounded in your smart work. And it was so different than how schools normally operate. We had to move quickly. We had to, leave a lot of questions unanswered about how it was going to work. And it's really just guided us so much. We're so fortunate for your wisdom.
Well, thanks, Emily. It might be worth just spending a minute for your audience, I'm sure most of whom have never heard of Be Fearless and probably haven't read the book. You keep referring to my work, but I really have to give sort of credit where credit is due. You know, the book was born, or the work of Be Fearless was born out of a very serious question we had. And that is, what is behind sort of success, transformational change, and breakthroughs? Because we all have this head talk that says, oh, you have to have gone to this school. And of course, on a whole, kids start out really well there. You have to go to this school, or have this track in education, or you have to have wealthy friends, or, some network, or whatever it is. We all have some idea about you must have that really to be on like a trajectory of transformational breakthroughs. So we wanted to go to school on that. And, we hired a series of social scientists who did work. They looked at breakthroughs and transformation across geographies, across time, and across sectors. And it was out of that work that the 5 principles I highlight in the book were really discovered. It's not any of those things that we thought. It's actually ordinary people who do extraordinary things. But how they do them is through the application of these 5 principles. And then just lastly, I'll say, again, it's not really my work, even though I wrote the book. I was so benefited to have all these wonderful stories of leaders who could be inspirations for us as they went, that fail in the footsteps of giants, right? Where I talk about Oprah being fired from television, Michael Jordan being cut from his basketball team. We don't necessarily know those stories. We only know the success at the end. And so I really felt like the stories brought the principles to life.
It's really clarifying to think about as I listened to both you and Emily, thinking about the way that we have that we condition ourselves to believing the former that you described, that there's this formulaic path versus these very, very clear, almost instinctual. I mean, they're sort of visceral launch pads for action. They're sort of propelled by spirit. They're propelled by mission. They're propelled by core values. And I think about this moment where, we've, as Emily described, we've acted sort of uncharacteristically for a school in our fearlessness and in our sort of launching forward beyond our bubble. And I think what we're recognizing in this moment is that we need to call attention to that. We need to call attention to, these aren't things that we did. These are what constitute us all as educators. It's there, it's baked in. And that's what we need to refer to going forward. It also makes me think that what we call out for students are different moments. They're not the moments of success that are arrived at through these formulaic, measures or assessments, but rather those sort of precious, magical moments when a child falls down and gets up, or crashes and burns and then comes back for more. Those are the things that we really need to be calling out. And that, I think, is what creates the ecosystem. If we do that for adults and children, then we're really creating a system that operates that way and shifting the way we the way that we think about how to do stuff, pure and simple.
Yeah, that is such a great point, Paris. At the Case Foundation, we instituted failure bonuses because I really wanted our team to be on the front lines of innovation and trying new things that were unproven. And, we would have these annual sessions where we'd have a red, yellow, or green light about, oh, it's green. We're firing on all pistons. And then you can imagine the red is, not sure that one's going to make it. And we had some efforts that were not short term. And so one of the things that we started doing was doing failure bonuses for those that tried to do some really, because that's who we wanted to be as an organization, but who tried to do some out there things. Every organization, every team has something that's really way out there and something that's more in their sort of risk tolerance level. But I think recognizing that you tried something really hard and you didn't make it is something worthy of recognition, just for the very fact that it was an effort to be, innovative in some way.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
I wonder what, imagining the ways that we recognize excellence in schools, what are the opportunities? And I think the Case Accelerated for Student Entrepreneurship has given us a space to do that, where it feels comfortable and appropriate to sort of broadcast your attempts and your failures in service of ongoing process. But when I look to the sort of traditionally academic realm, it's how might we create a space where we're letting kids know that, pushing beyond your limits is something you should do. And if you don't achieve it, that's great. What would award ceremonies look like if we were honoring failure and for really hard stretch goals?
And counting failure. I mean, I think about, making failure count, right? So that it's not, you fail and so you go back to the drawing board. I mean, this notion of going forward just keeps coming up for me, that every failure is an incremental step forward, right? That it counts for something, that we're actually, we should credit ourselves or credit those failures and keep track of those failures in some way. I mean, it really turns a lot of a lot of traditional assessment on its ear.
Mm-hmm.
Really. Yeah, and I just want to make clear, there's big failures and sort of small failures, and we're not talking about the failure of screwing up, like purposely screwing up or not following through. We're talking about the failure of diligently stepping things out, working them through. And, if you think about, for instance, how we teach kids robotics, we don't wait until the robot is built. We chunk it down to small parts, right? So if they have failures, they can actually recover from them and still end up with a robot at the end. And I think, one of the things I try to do in the book, because it's a common question I get anytime I'm, talking with folks, and that is, well, what's the difference between reckless risk and measured risk, right? Because for everyone, that's going to look a little different, and for every organization. And so one of the things that I tried to point out in the book is this idea of chunking down a big idea to almost snackable parts, so that if you do fail, it's not curtains. But also understanding your own risk tolerance, where you fall. There's some exercises that I refer to in the book and some work of others to say, could you take 1% and take a risk on that, so that if you fail on that, again, the impact of that is not that strong. So I think there's a lot of strategies around how to begin to embrace failure without sort of betting the farm.
Yeah, and so much of that, Jean, leads us to a narrative and a construct that we know is really healthy for all learners of all ages, right? That failing is something that you do because you're trying really hard, not something that you are. And that's something that we constantly have to be holding ourselves accountable to, making sure that school isn't telling kids that this is, when something doesn't go right, that's not who you are. That's something that you experienced. And that's, here's how you recover from that. Sort of building that resiliency in, which is so important to us.
So can I turn the tables on the two of you and be the questioner? Mm-hmm. As you know, one of the principles in the book is reach beyond your bubble. And the idea there is that, people coming together from different backgrounds and different perspectives tend to outperform the results. And there's so much data on that now. And I know that's something Punahou embraces. But when I think about reach beyond your bubble, I really do think about the Punahou community, which is so diverse in so many ways. And, I think this term, and you probably use it at Punahou, I don't know, has come around to say intellectual diversity, because it's not as simple as just what we all think about as diversity. We like to say reach beyond your bubble says that if we come at something from different perspectives because of our backgrounds, we can broaden each other's perspectives, but also protect each other from blind spots, because I might see, a disaster pending that you might, or vice versa. So I've really seen that play out. I'd love to hear from you kind of how, the role of reach beyond your bubble that you've both had in your careers at Punahou.
Yeah, it's such an important construct, and the seeking out people who've had experiences different than you has been really important this year and always. I feel like for me, the opportunity to have worked in the WOE International Center at Punahou really, that helped me build a community of educators around the world. So as this year was beginning to unfold, and when I say this year, I mean like these last 18 months, were beginning to unfold, like my first calls were to people in China who are already, operating with their schools shut down and closed. And, how did they do that? What did they emphasize? What was getting in the way? So people who had sort of been down the road that you're about to go down was super important. And I found that as we were, figuring out what school was going to look like here for the year, there's sort of Punahou has a culture of educational instructional innovation that's really robust and always has been. Mm-hmm. And this year really brought every single person to that conversation. So there were some folks who maybe they weren't the first ones to raise their hand when we were talking about a new educational innovation or exploring a new pedagogy, but every single faculty member had critical insights to how we were going to operate in this new context. And so we had to really make sure that we were listening to every single voice and hearing all the different ways that people were showing up in this new context. We also were lucky to get to, I feel like in the pandemic, our relationships with folks in other just neighbor schools around the island really deepened because we all we didn't want it to be a, distinguishing factor between our schools, which one was safer, which one was, handling things. Right. We really wanted that to be something we were all really succeeding at. And so there was a ton of really meaningful dialogue and collaboration in that space.
That's great.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, and I'm going to answer this one a little bit more on a personal note. I think, well, going back to your point, and the point that Emily just made about close listening, active listening to everyone. I think what's really amazing about a truly diverse community is that there are different epistemologies. There are totally different ways of knowing the world that can be plumbed here. So there are going to be a range of solutions. Talk about blind spots. When you're talking about diversity of epistemology and you're talking about, cultural approaches to problem solving or cultural approaches to design, boy, when you listen closely, you hear a range, an array that one individual or even two individuals couldn't possibly fathom, right? So I think that's something to definitely be plumbed in. And I loved that there was so much, as Emily talked about, so much back and forth and bringing folks into conversations, not just to report out or to sort of, lay out operations, but to really plumb for solutions and new ways of approaching problems and asking folks who are true experts. When you think about a K-12 school, you've got people who are expert at working with children at the age of 5 and folks that are expert at working with children who are at the age of 17. So there's a huge range of knowledge around, expertly approaching children. I think the other thing that I want to note that's, I think, characteristic or characteristic of a Punahou journey is that it offers so many opportunities. I've done in my career here 5 jobs that I'd never done before. 5 different jobs that I'd never done before. And I think that is emblematic of what happens at Punahou for children. It's been happening for me since I was a child and it continued into my adulthood. But I really do believe that if you're looking for those moments where, I think this is interesting, I think I can be useful, I think I can learn something, I feel that's something that is available in this context, not just this context, but certainly in this context. So
that's right.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question that came in about, and I wonder if we can link it to this notion. So somebody wondering, what are the data and metrics that schools can use to track progress? And I wonder about this question of how do we, assess that we are getting all the intellectual diversity that we need both in our student population and in our employee population to ensure that we are as robust and successful a learning environment as we can be. That's not something that's easy to count or track I wonder, Jean, do you see organizations doing that in creative ways, or how do they go about that?
Well, I think it's probably different for a school, right? Because you're training them up sort of before they launch into the world. But I think anyone who's been around the Punahou community could see, and I'm not saying this is, hard data research, but I think you can sort of just, tell the kind of environment that they've been raised in, to ask good questions, to be critical thinkers, so that's how I would certainly try to look at a school as, what has the byproduct been? And we've always been impressed with that. It's funny because I have this game I play, which is, Georgetown University graduates, a lot of folks, and they're a Jesuit school, and they have these really strong values. And it has gotten to the point where if I'm sitting in a business meeting, when the business meeting's over, I'll say to someone, "Are you from Georgetown?" Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, I hit it like 90% of the time. And there's just something that they inculcate about, just who that person is, the character, the way that they sort of engage in the world that's identifiable. And, that's not necessarily research, but I do think there's sort of hard and there's soft ways of understanding, is this school hitting it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that brings us to we're one of the provocations that we've enjoyed over the years is the challenge of like figuring out how to measure the things that matter, even if they might be a little bit harder to measure. And that sort of intangible that you're describing that's not something we can count when the kids are walking across the stage at graduation and say, yep, they've got that. And that was another question that sort of came into the Q&A, if failure is a good thing and so critical to growth, how is Punahou looking at systems of assessment of learning? We give letter grades, but how do you evaluate progress and failure attempts? I wonder, Paris, if we want to just try to connect those threads for people really quickly.
Sure. I think what we're doing a ton of in the junior school is looking at progressive record keeping, so that at any point in time we're really looking at a kid's progress. They're not necessarily, we're not necessarily looking at grade level progress anymore, but individual personalized progress. Giving equity of access to all the skills that children need, certainly over the course of a year and the course of a trajectory across the school. But what we're looking at is where children are in that progress and targeting support, so that we're literally personalizing that child's trajectory towards those skills. I think that's happening definitely with regard to reading and writing, and our math curriculum is a guided pace. So we're really looking at children becoming mathematical thinkers, and creating agility for children, so that when they get to the point where they are learning algorithmic math, they have a facility and an understanding because they've played in that sandbox over and over and over again with targeted support that's personalized to their own learning trajectory.
So Paris, are you using technology on that front? One of the things that excites me most in this field of education and innovation is the ability to use AI really to begin to frame how the student learns, if they're more of a visual learner, to literally adapt the curriculum for them personally so that it plays to their strengths. Are you playing with any of those tools yet?
100%. Yeah, we've got some wonderful applications in both literacy and math that do just that. So children are not, there's the AI targets the child's progress, but it's also engaging, and the child takes ownership, right? The child then understands where they are, understands what they need, and selects, puts them in charge of what they need oftentimes.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny because in this pandemic year, I decided I would study Spanish. And please don't speak to me in Spanish because I'm not yet ready to converse comfortably in front of people. But I've used this app called Duolingo, which you probably know all about. But one of the things I've noted is if I'm in a particularly hard session and I've made a few mistakes, the little icon, little guy is like a little owl, and he says, don't worry. how we really learn is from mistakes. And I was just thinking, how powerful that is as a motivator in education. I reflected on any papers I ever got back where I got things wrong. I don't remember anybody saying, oh, good, you'll really learn from this now.
Well, totally. I love that. And I love that example, because the other thing that would happen is that oftentimes people are just sort of progressing through formula or step, is that those little things that children are missing got overlooked and kids got passed on, and we got passed on to the next grade without noting. I'm having a very good echo, so I'm having a hard time communicating. Maybe that's better. Can you hear me all right? Okay, all right. I'll keep going even though I can hear myself. Oh, there we go. My simple is that that kind of software, you know what you're missing, and you go back and fix it, or you learn it, or you spend the time it takes, as opposed to dancing with that tool in your understanding.
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure if we are. Are we still good? Okay. Yeah, I think that adaptive learning piece. I'm hearing myself talk, but that adaptive learning piece is so important, and we know that in the traditional classroom, kids might get that feedback, or Jean, you get that feedback on a paper, but maybe a week and a half later. So the proximity to feedback to learning is what really triggers and deepens learning. So we're trying to achieve that by really talking about personalizing learning. Even when you're in a classroom with 24 other kids, you're moving along at the pace that your brain is moving along and getting the feedback that you need right when you need it, really sort of in situ, which is what helps move things along. And that's why those language apps are so successful. You can learn really quickly, whereas if you're in a class, it might take you 3 days to get the feedback that you needed. At that point, the moment and opportunity is sort of gone.
Yeah.
Are we okay? We're good. Okay, thanks. Okay, I keep hearing an echo, but we're just going to keep rolling. I wonder if we could look into another little corner, which is actually about in the recent context, we've been guessing and anticipating, but in sort of a balanced. What are some of the? And I throw this out to both of you, Emily. What are the corners that we should be looking into, around, and what are the things that we should be spotting? I'm so sorry. I'm having a very hard time because I'm hearing terrible. I'm going to pause.
I think we're having some tech issues right now.
I think so. Paris, what I heard you saying or asking was, what are the, they're probably saying we're good, but we hear ourselves talking. What are the corners that we need to look into to sort of see what the futures might hold for us?
Yeah, I'm asking, I'm really thinking about anticipation.
Maybe we should take a short recess.
Yeah, let's pause for a moment. That'd be awesome.
All right, shall we try this again?
Oh, I think we're back. Yeah,
Good. All right. Thank you.
good. I'm glad everyone had the opportunity to get up and go to the bathroom and stretch. What would it be without a small technical glitch that is what we've all learned to live with, and we are letting urgency conquer our fear?
There you go.
Doesn't get in the way.
No. Paris, you had a great question.
Well, so I was just thinking about this notion of peeking around the corners. And, you know, in the context of COVID, we were looking ahead, we were guessing, we were anticipating, and moving ahead fearlessly because we had no choice. But we live so empirically, and people, you know, there's this sense of trying to make folks feel comfortable with something that in this activity of peeking around the corners. And you give a great example of this, Jean. I can't remember the company. I think actually it was the Twitter example, where something got shifted pretty dramatically, and they actually had to make folks feel comfortable with a whole new thing.
Right.
Or it might have been Amazon. I can't remember. But so I wonder about you know, this. What's around the corner for us?
Yeah. It's a really powerful question, Paris. And the idea, you know, where I write about peek around corners is really to point out that innovation and breakthroughs come from the ability to have a vision for what others can't necessarily see. And I really quote Henry Ford, who said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? They couldn't imagine a car. Just like we can't imagine a flying car right now. So, you know, the whole idea of peeking around corners and transformation is it's often something someone sees that no one else can. And, you know, I referred in the book to our early days at AOL. You know, when I can remember, why would I ever need an email address, like, or a website for my business? Like, because they couldn't see it. It was a future unknown to them. And where so many great breakthroughs come from is someone really imagining a different way forward than the world is ready for.
Mm-hmm.
Paris, what do you, I mean, when we hear that, Jean, my mind just starts like exploding with all of the possible futures for our kids and for schools. And I mean, what are the spaces where, I mean, we talked a little bit about AI and adaptive learning and assessment that really is super personalized and meets kids where they are. I mean, what are the other spaces in the world beyond education that we can sort of look to and should be thinking about helping kids be comfortable in the educational context? You both have good insights on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, Paris, what do you think?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think about, you know, inventive spaces, right? And how we feel as educators that we have to provide children with so much. And I wonder about placing children in situations where they really have very little information and have to discover out beyond school walls, right?
Right.
So it's sort of shifting this notion that you come to school to receive as opposed to being in school in other places where you're really seeking, you're really discovering, you're really actually hurting for information. I mean, not in a bad way, but you're yearning for more information. You have to fight a little bit for it. So to me, I think about contexts that aren't as predictable and well known.
Yeah, and children can be powerful innovators because they're not carrying the baggage or the frame that we all have in our minds about how things should be. You know, if you remember, we lost Steve's brother, who was a Punahou grad, Dan Case, to brain cancer, and we got deeply engaged in brain cancer during that time. He had actually started a brain cancer organization before he passed that we helped with. And to a person, the doctors just said the fact that lay people could be at the table and asking questions because they don't have all the baggage of it's not done that way. Or the story I tell in my book is of Jane Goodall, who had no formal education, only a high school education when she went to Africa as a young woman. So she wasn't schooled in how you study animals. She didn't have any of that, do this, don't do that. And she reinvented animal study because she didn't have that. And it just turns out that it's a strategic advantage. I tell story after story, Airbnb, you name it. These great companies or organizations or breakthroughs because someone wasn't stopped by the rules because they didn't necessarily have them. And almost to a person, they'll tell you, well, if I had known what the rules were, I probably wouldn't have done what I did.
I love that. It makes me also think about how we look internally as educators. And I would imagine this happens with other professions, but I'm curious as to how much we look internally for answers. And I think about, you mentioned unlikely partnerships. I think about where do those conversions lie for those convergences lie for us, where we actually intersect with other professions, with other types of human work, for example, and how do we create those intersections for children? Not but in really, really authentic, meaningful ways, in the context of our own partnerships, our own unlikely partnerships with folks far beyond education. I'm curious about what you all think that some of those interesting partnerships might be for educators and for students to be engaged with.
I mean, that made me think of, when you're saying that made me think of the stories in Japan about the declining population and how they're combining spaces with, elder care facilities and schools, because having those two populations together, they require a lot of the same needs and they serve each other's learning and well-being in really unique ways. And then I think about schools and how, we've had to do work over the years, Paris, figuring out, okay, how do we employ people and have people on our staff who don't have traditional sort of academic pedigree, but are remarkable educators. And that gets back to that diversity question, what kinds of lives have people lived that serve our students' learning and work, and making sure that our campus shows that there's lots of ways to live a good life and that kids have access to seeing that all the time.
I think at National Geographic, we really have taken this to heart in that we, about 6 years ago, created a joint venture to take all of our commercial businesses and put them in partnership with, a large company. It started with the company that helped us build the National Geographic Channel, which was Fox, but then it's transferred to the Walt Disney Company now. So as a result of that, we have the world's largest social media footprint of any brand, and we reach nearly 1 billion people a month. Why does that matter? Because we really exist, for the wonder of the world and to inspire people in science and exploration and education. And having that kind of global reach, just allows us to extend really and expand our brand and our mission way beyond what a nonprofit could do on its own. And the fact is, most organizations don't think about unlikely partnerships, and a lot of entrepreneurs don't either when they're getting started. They're just heads down. But sometimes pulling your head up and really kind of mapping out who could really help us go faster and farther, can lead to some really interesting answers. No one would expect a 133-year-old nonprofit, which is what National Geographic is, to have a joint venture with the Walt Disney Company.
It really makes you think about platform as well, right? And I think when I think about platform, I translate that for school-minded folks into campus. What is a school campus? And traditionally, obviously, it's this locale here with the bounds of the walls around us. But where should kids be learning? And where should teachers be learning? Where should school be taking place? And what's the new platform for school? We've obviously played in the online platform, which is a fascinating platform and one that I don't think have leveraged fully. We sort of did in crisis mode, but there's so much that we can do with with cameras and connection far beyond the campus and far beyond the state and far beyond the country. But also, how do we move from this physical campus to other physical campuses, and how do we expand that notion of campus and where learning takes place? And
Right.
that's super exciting. And that could be a huge value add.
It makes me think of all of our conversations about the notion of a K-12 learning commons and what a commons, the physical and the sort of conceptual notion of it, what it should look like and be, and you know, if we know that innovation and revolution, if you will, happens at those sort of intersections, that the nexus of different ways of seeing the world and different projects and different fields, how do we sort of make that the natural thing that kids on our campus are really walking through places where they're seeing the collision of different ideas and ways of being in the world. Somebody asked in the chat about the role and importance of creativity and innovation. Like, what's the difference between creativity and innovation, and how do those things function differently? Jean, love to hear your thoughts on
Sure, I'll take a stab at that, but I think you all have really embraced this in the Entrepreneurial Center. It's interesting because I think people think of innovation or entrepreneurship as, again, something you're supposed to be born with or you have certain qualities. But, really, when you peel back the onion, what innovators and entrepreneurs do is they solve problems or they chase opportunities. And usually those are problems or opportunities that they have lived either in their own life or someone, that they've observed in someone close to them. And they just think, oh, well, there could be a better way. And, I think in the last year and a half, a lot of us might have scratched our heads and said, there's got to be a better way to do that. Okay. But we all think somebody should do something about that. Mm-hmm. What we're really trying to capture is making sure, everyone feels that they're that somebody or feels empowered to be that somebody. Because, entrepreneurs solve problems. That's what they do. They build products, they build services, they build new things to address challenges and opportunities. And I think, if you could kind of look at it that way, then you don't get stuck in this, oh, you're an entrepreneur or you're not an entrepreneur, right? Yeah. You're someone with the full potential to change the world if you saw a really great idea about how to address a challenge or an opportunity.
I mean, Jean, that's the notion of, there was a question earlier too about, how is this all connected to social emotional learning? And it feels like you just hit on that with the notion of a sense of agency and purpose, that when humans feel like they have the agency to make choices and sort of cut their own path, that there's a really strong connection to wellness and well-being and, happiness. If you feel like when you see a problem in the world, you have the capacity to go and, garner the resources to try to fix it, that's a really strong
right. Yeah, one thing I was, just going to point out though is, I kind of live in the past. I love history, and I just, I love to sort of relive stories in history. And it's so clear to me that one thing that's changed in like the last half a century is we've kind of bifurcated who is arts and who is sciences. Mm-hmm. But how we got to now is because we had generations of, brilliant people they didn't have to be brilliant, just great people who embraced both the arts and the sciences. Mm-hmm. I mean, in many ways, the arts enabled the sciences because we didn't have photography. So you'd need an illustrator to be in, the woods with you or whatever. And I think one of the challenges for education is figuring that out. Because and I'm not saying this about Punahou, I'm saying this more broadly, that I think as arts and sciences come back and closer together, we will get a little closer to this idea of sort of empowering everyone, to figure out their path forward.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've been talking a lot and grappling a lot with sort of the nexus of design and how that sort of fits in between, sort of bridges, engineering and the arts and figuring out how we have that be part of kids' experience. We have these great classes in the high school that are we call Global Sustainability by Design, and they're science classes, but they're also there's folks from the art team who are consulting on that sort of creativity and idea generation process, and some of the technical, mechanics of of design.
Well, I think you both hit on something really important, and that is that, you know, creativity often results when disparate features are sort of meant to meld. And, you know, you sort of attach stickiness to paper and you've got to post it, right? I mean, that's the classic trite example, but you're putting things together that don't normally go together. And that's where I think this, you know, notion of unlikely connections is really, really important for all of us.
I agree.
Gosh, I mean, looks like we're zeroing in on this the close of our time. Do we have time for another question, I think? Em?
Yeah, I think so. There was an interesting question a little while.
There's one about social, emotional, and ethical learning and diversity. Do you want to go there, or?
Yeah, let's do that one.
So yeah, this one is about how does social, emotional, ethical learning and emotional intelligence fit into the diversity equation. I can take a little bit of a start there. When we are learning and developing our social, emotional intelligence, obviously we're understanding ourselves and our relationship with others. There's a huge core goal of social emotional learning, and that is being acknowledged, belonging, knowing that you belong to something larger than yourself, and understanding how to have others belong, which is at the core of equity and inclusion aims. So there's a huge connection between belonging, affirmation, acknowledgement of self and others that is at the heart of equity and inclusion. That's sort of the simple 2-second answer.
Yeah, and I would say there's a growing body of data on this, even in the corporate environment. And particularly the last year, I think that, you know, there have been some early studies undertaken that seem to say that the more empathetic a leader was, the more successful that leader was getting through the year. And doesn't that make sense? But coming into, or pre-pandemic, let's say, you know, if you put up 5 qualities that make a great leader, I don't think most people would naturally think of empathy as, you know, a corporate leader as one of the most important things. But I think that's just, I think there's more and more science growing around this that is showing outperformance and sort of just creating a better company to work for.
So true. We've seen so much of that this year. Jean, we are so grateful to you and to Steve for all of your leadership at Punahou. You've really nudged us to create spaces that help kids know themselves, be confident in building brave new futures. We're really excited that coming up right after this is a pitch to the pros experience. And if you're wondering sort of what does it look like for kids at Punahou to be engaged in some of this work, you'll get to hear some kids who have been supported by the CASE Accelerator for Student Entrepreneurship actually pitching their ideas, which will be super, super fun. But this has been a real treat for us, Jean. We're so grateful for your wisdom and your contributions to our work in service of our precious kids. So mahalo nui. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Paris and Emily, and for all that you do. And, you know, heart goes out to everyone in our Punahou community. So thanks so much.
You're such a gift and an inspiration. Thanks, Jean.
Thank you.
Mahalo.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Aloha, everyone.